Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I should answer one of the questions I've been getting recently in detail so that people understand this rather nuanced topic. Because something I've pointed out to people in the past, and this is the reason that concurrent periodization exists, is so that we can train different primary training modalities inside of the same week. And what we know based upon the general literature, and I'll just break it down. If you train a bunch of heavy triples and a bunch of heavy tens in the same week, if you put them into the same day, your performance is going to suffer. In other words, we know that you can do more total weight and more training volume if you do all the triples on one day for a movement pattern or body part, and almost all the tens on a different day. That's the closest summary to it. That you will actually find that if you do just half of the number of triples on one day and then half of the number of tens, and then you try to replicate that performance, your actual progress will be slower. In other words, you probably won't be able to lift quite as much weight throughout the week on all the sets. And so concurrent periodization separates our different training modalities. Now, where there's confusion is that people are seeing me while running a conjugate type periodization, which is, again, a form of concurrent periodization. It's a more specialized version. They're like, why are you, on your max effort days, are you doing a bunch of sets of tens? Perfect example, a bunch of sets of tens on step ups and good mornings after hitting a max squat. Like, doesn't that go contrary to it? It's like, no, because I'm not doing max squats again later in the week, right? I'm just doing volume training behind the max work. My primary training modality is not the high rep training. It's not the high rep training. What am I doing on the other days? I have 2 max effort squat / deadlifts and press type days. In other words, I train to a max squat or a max deadlift of some type. It's a lower body max. And then I do some form of press for max effort work as an upper body max. And I tend to throw all my upper body pulling and tricep work and delts and any of that stuff on the press day. And then extra lower body work, which is everything from good mornings to step ups and any sort of quad work or anything I'm going to do on the squat and deadlift days. And even lower and mid back. Right? We'll do mid back work and things. That gets done on the lower body days. But I'm not training the same modality. In other words, I'm not trying to come and hit a max lift twice in the week. So just like I would tell you, don't try to come and train heavy triples twice a week. Probably not a good idea. And if you're going to do tens on your primary exercises, God forbid you try to do heavy work and then tens after 2 different days in a week on a squat or a bench press. It is going to produce less results from a programming perspective. Okay? I don't do those later in the week that way. I do dynamic effort work. So what happens? So I do that on one part of the week, and then for the dynamic work, I'm doing speed squats and deadlifts, and then speed benching on a separate day, followed by, again, smaller supplemental work. This doesn't break the paradigm. Why? Because I'm not trying to use the primary training twice a week at half the volume. My primary training stimulus is the max work and then the speed work. Those are my 2 primary forms of training. If I was doing something like triples and tens on the big lifts, yeah, mixing them in the same session like that might not work too well if I'm going to try to repeat the same pattern. You're better separating them out. So in other words, I don't try to have days where I mix max and dynamic work twice in the same week. We see the point? I only have 1 max squat or deadlift and 1 max effort upper body in the same week. Same with the dynamic work. We come over and we do speed squats only once a week. Speed benching is done only once a week. So the secondary rep ranges are being done as after. They're being done after all the other primary. Now, people would say, well, does that mean that the rep work will suffer? Of course it will. Of course it will. Because I'm doing it after, do you guys really think I can do the same amount of work? No. In other words, these 10 rep sets and stuff that you see me doing after this stuff, and 8 rep sets and all these things, if I did those on their own day, I would be stronger at them. I would be stronger at them. Of course I would. I would probably be moving 10% more weight for the same number of reps. I don't care whether it's a step up or the bow bar bench or anything else. The pull-ups. So the performance hit is occurring. It doesn't break the rule. But because I'm only doing the primary training modality once every 7 days, it is fine. It can recover independently. They're separate. But people will say, well, is it a negative that the volume work is going to be weaker? No, because it's being done as a secondary training stimulus. It is not the primary form of training. In other words, it's being done purely for metabolic fatigue on various angles and joint angles and muscle groups that need more work. And here's the interesting thing. Metabolic fatigue creates its own muscle growth. And we know that. And I'll go so far as to say that because we're doing it as a secondary training stimulus, we can break certain normal rules that we wouldn't follow for primary work. It's a perfect example. What do I mean? We know based upon various studies that short breaks, for example, on high rep work, produces slightly less muscle growth. Why? Because you're forced to use less weight. You get less total mechanical tension. Creates the fatigue, but without the mechanical tension. I'm already getting mechanical tension. I'm already getting the maximum weight training because I hit maxes every week. There is nothing that trains strength or mechanical tension more than 1 rep maxes. Nothing in the world can. That's it. You can't exceed that. I'm hitting that every week, so I'm already getting the mechanical tension. I'm not that worried. So what are we worried about on a system like this with the higher rep exercises? Are we generating enough metabolic fatigue to keep us growing? In other words, we're taking all of our weaker muscle groups and throwing a bunch of volume at them as an after effect to ensure that we keep the weakest muscles growing. So we find out what all of our weakest muscles are on the big lifts and do volume for them. And if I'm getting to challenging reps to where I only have 1 rep left in reserve or hit muscle failure, does it matter if I'm forced to use slightly less weight because I'm fatigued throughout the week? Probably not. Because on the backside, the growth response is the same because the primary exercises are still progressing. It's basically like thinking in these terms. Does it matter if your curls, you use the same weight for 6 months straight for a bunch of sets of 10 as long as they're fatiguing? If your pull-ups and chin-ups are getting stronger and going up. No, it doesn't matter. Do you know why? Because you're already fatiguing the muscles and seeing progressive overload with the big movement. You're seeing progressive overload there. That is a primary training response. And if all you can do, because the progressive overload is leaving you fatigued, more and more fatigued because it's getting stronger and you're doing more work, and you do a smaller exercise like a incline curl or a strict barbell curl or whatever you're doing as a secondary movement to create more fatigue, your overall workload is still going up. And if you're still reaching the same rate of perceived exertion or reps in reserve or flat muscle failure on the smaller movement, isn't it just creating the additional metabolic fatigue behind the big exercise? Of course it is. It's still stimulating muscle growth. So the point we would make here is that I'm not breaking the rule, I'm observing the rule. The primary movement pattern we're not mixing. We're not mixing the primary training stimuluses. Only thing that's getting mixed is the secondary work. And as a result, because the secondary work is done at a higher frequency and behind the other movements, its performance does suffer. I cannot move the same weight for a set of 10 or a bunch of sets of 10 on the secondary exercises. I can't, because the rule holds true. I'm in a fatigue state. And I'm doing them at a high frequency. Therefore, they are never fully recovered when I get to them. So the rule is that it will inhibit performance, which could inhibit growth. Well, in this case, it's not the primary training modality, so it's not as important. And my only other option would be not to do it. Well, that's not going to work either. Not going to work either. So the only other option would be to say, well, we're going to be dogmatic about it and say that if we can't get maximum performance out of these 10 rep sets, we're just not going to do them at all because we have 2 other training modalities that have to come before them. That's not viable either. That's being dogmatic to the point of stupidity. Doesn't work. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.